Again, welcome everybody. We're going to talk about step one today, and start with some quick intros. I'll go first because I'm on the left. I'm Ben. I'm the creative director here at Sketchy. I was a history major in undergrad, and then took a long and winding path to medicine. Went to med school at Columbia, and then matched in urology out here in LA at UCLA. Did about half my intern year before I realized that my destiny was to make cartoons for all of you. So I finished out that year and then came to Sketchy, and I've been here for about 4 years now.
I'll go next because I'm in the middle. My name is Pooja. I'm a creative content developer here at Sketchy. I did my undergrad at MIT. I was majored in bio with a concentration in theater arts. So always had a little bit of a creative interest. Then went on to also go to Columbia. I did my MD, MS in biomedical engineering. And opted out of going halfway through my intern year to figure out that I wanted to be at Sketchy. So landed here and happy to be here.
That's awesome. And hey, everyone, I'm Camden. I'm currently a fourth year at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Med School, but I've been here for a long time. I did an MD PhD program. So I started my undergrad at Emory. Neuroscience was my major. Came up to New Jersey to complete an MD PhD in neuroscience. And I'm heading off applying to interventional radiology right now. And I'm joining everyone from the blueprint side of things that we'll talk about a little bit later. And so super excited to work with Sketchy and telling you guys how to crush step one.
Sweet, yeah, get that, Hoagie Haven. Cool. So here's our sort of quick agenda for the day. We're going to talk about quickly Sketchy and Blueprint. We'll talk a lot about step one, so some passing strategies, some life lessons, things we wish we knew beforehand, what the sort of impact of pass fail is, and we'll be curious to hear from y'all on that front as well, actually. How to make this fit in your life and sort of balance what you've got going on around you with studying for step one. And then, as Jen said, we've got some special stuff at the end. So I'll talk quickly about Sketchy because I think you're mostly familiar with it. Sketchy is a visual learning platform. We take all the really hard, complicated, and sometimes secretly boring stuff that you need to know and turn it into what we think are pretty fun and funny cartoons that help you learn and remember it forever. It's been used by more than 500,000 med students at this point, which is just like kind of a mind-blowing number. And people like it because it's fun and it helps you be efficient with your study time, but also ultimately because it helps you pass step one, score better on step two, which is really sort of the crux of the thing. We started out as SketchyMicro, which is, I think, what a lot of people still call us. But like Apple, we changed our name to just Sketchy. And we offer a lot beyond just the micro and the farm. We have Path and Immuno and Biochem and all the first year and second year courses. And then we actually have a very, very significant clinical offering as well. As you can see there, we cover not quite yet all of the major rotations, although stay tuned for this summer. But all of that is meant to help you with your exams, both in school and your licensing exams, with your clerkships, with your rotations, with your shelves, sort of all of it. We want to be there throughout your med school journey. So, I've already talked about this a little bit, but why Sketchy? Because it's more effective. You'll learn faster and remember longer than sort of staring at a textbook. We say have time for friends, hobbies, and physical activities, but you're med students, you don't remember what those things are. Really what we mean is have time for more studying. But we try and make it fun. This is a huge part of your life. And so we want it not to suck. We cover basically everything in preclinical, and as I said, at this point, most of your clinical year, shelves, step one, step two, etc. And people who use Sketchy and really mean it do really, really well on these tests. So we're pretty proud and happy about that. Camden, I think this looks like a blank slide, but it's actually not. It's got some animation. So you tell me when
Oh, fancy. We got animations on this one.
Yeah.
We can go, I think we can click through them. Probably 2 more clicks right now. Perfect. Yeah. So, hi everyone. Like I was saying, I'm from Blueprint Med. We're a big tutoring company that also offers some resources. Basically, our objective is to make your life as easy as possible to get to, have you accomplish the goals that you want to accomplish. Med school is hard. We're here to help. So there's a lot of free tools that we offer that I encourage you to check out if you've not heard of them. One of them is this med school study planner that we offer. It's right on the website. It's called Cram Fighter, and it's basically a very smart study planner that limits the amount of work that you have to do. You select the resources, and it automatically creates a study schedule that then can be rapidly adjusted in like 15 seconds if life happens and you get behind, or if life happens and you get ahead. But the big part of Blueprint Med is we're step tutors. I've myself have tutored hundreds of hours. We have tutors who have tutored thousands of hours. We're from all walks of life and all levels of kind of med school. And so it's all about kind of one-on-one tutoring so that we can personalize everything to, figure out how you best learn and get you where you need to be. And then the other little thing that I would just love for you to check out, because it's new that we're offering, is some of our step 2 and shelf question banks. I've written questions for these, and I think that they're like really, really good, particularly the explanations. And so they can kind of complement some of the other test banks out there as you prepare for your exams. Which gets us to more animations. But this is actually, there's a new step 1 practice exam. So it's 280 questions. You can go, there's a little link at the bottom of this page here where you can go and you can get 100% off. So you can get it free. Take the exam. It offers another very realistic like exam to allow you to assess where you are. I encourage you to take it really early on as you prepare for step 1 to kind of get like a baseline of what you need to do to prepare for the exam.
So realistic, just looking at that picture sends a shiver down my spine.
Pretty much. There's a lot of good pictures on it. And then a little promo at the end is that we're going to offer some free tutoring, either with me or anyone else who you'd like to tutor with.
Sweet. Awesome. Thanks, Camden. So let's get into it. We'll talk about step 1. As I said, we'll sort of start talking about some strategy, and I think, Camden, we're going to open with your sort of approach. Just one quick note. I see there's already some questions coming in. That's awesome. We'll try and sort of answer them as we go. Throw them in the Q&A feature or the chat. We're looking at both.
Awesome. I'm going to answer one of those questions right away. We had one asking if we tutor in different languages, and does the platform offer different languages? I think the platform is in English, but we tutor in all sorts of languages. We've got a lot of bi and trilingual tutors that work for us. So let's talk about step 1. And this is my baby. This is what I've tutored the vast majority of my time. And I think that while everyone has a personalized study strategy, there's a couple of core tenets that are really important to doing well. Go ahead and click forward. And that's starting off strong. So if you save all of your studying for your dedicated study period, it's going to be tough. It's a lot of information to learn. Traditionally, this has been your first 2, sometimes 2.5 years of med school, all crammed into one exam. It's not the time to procrastinate. Start early. You don't need to be going 10 hours a day from day 1. Start early during your pre-dedicated and your coursework years. And there's a couple of resources I want you to kind of get through in that time. Go and click forward. And we'll talk about that in a second, but then you get to the dedicated. So dedicated, that's where you're going to actually be kind of turning up dialing up the intensity. And this is where you're going to go through some resources again, but then where you're really going to start to tackle questions and learn more actively. But when you're in that pre-dedicated time period, I know we're on a Sketchy webinar. I don't care what webinar we're on. I would say this exact same thing no matter what. Every single student that I've worked with, I encourage them to tackle SketchyMicro and SketchyPharm, at a minimum during their pre-clerkship years. This information, it just sticks with you really well. And then it's going to make Like, it takes time to get through that material. And so it's going to make your dedicated period a lot easier when you've seen all of it once. And it's going to help you on your pre-clerkship exams. The other big thing is first aid is a great encyclopedia. If it's not in first aid, it's probably not going to be on step one. And so what you can do is you can start with getting comfortable with that as a textbook. It's kind of a weird textbook. It's almost like a bunch of flashcards. So just get comfortable with it during your pre-clerkship years. Don't study it per se, but skim it. Get comfortable where different sections are and the information that's in there. And then you're going to want to start to complete a test bank. This could be Blueprints test bank. This could be UWorld. This could be Amboss. Traditionally, UWorld is a really strong candidate, and you're going to want to get through that early on and get through at least a chunk of it before dedicated so that you can get comfortable with the interface and really start to learn that information. Go and click forward. And then we get to dedicated. Oh, the stressful time. This is always stressful. It was stressful, when it wasn't pass fail. It's even still stressful now that it is pass fail. It's a lot of information to retain. And so one of the big things is you want to keep your resources limited. You don't want resource fatigue. Best resources for you want a retention tool. So a great one for that is going to be like SketchyMicro, Farm, and Path. Then you want an encyclopedia. That's going to be first aid. And then you want an active testing tool. And that's going to be like UWorld in your UWorld journal. And then, of course, some practice exams along the way, because you're going to want to see your progress to make sure that you're prepared, that you have a high percentage of passing this exam. And then the final couple of weeks, this is where you kind of are like, okay, this is a marathon, not a sprint, but now I'm in the final sprint. And so usually I recommend students turn it up a notch, a little bit on the number of questions that they do. This is going to be more of a active review time. And we can actually click through twice more, I believe, to kind of illustrate this. Yeah. And that's where over the course of your preparation for step one, whether or not it's 8 weeks or 12 weeks, it doesn't really matter. The same principle applies where your structured review. So like your encyclopedic knowledge, you're taking time to really digest the material, that decreases. And then if we click through again, you'll see that our active review increases over the final couple weeks so that we make sure that we get through all of our test bank before test day.
Quick question, Kevin.
Yeah, totally.
A couple of people are wondering what a UWorld journal is.
Yes, a UWorld journal. I'm glad you asked. A UWorld journal is a great trick. Basically, it's a creation of a flashcard for every single one of your test questions. If you get it right, make a flashcard. If you get it wrong, make a flashcard. I use UWorld as an example here because basically there's like 3,500 questions. If you complete all of UWorld and you make a flashcard for every question, then you're going to have 3,500 questions. The key thing here is that it's going to be very simple. These flashcards should take 30 seconds to make, 60 seconds to make. Basically, you just ask yourself, what is the key fact I needed to know to get this question right? And then just write that one-liner key fact. It's not a time to really get into the pathophysiology that much. And also there's some great resources on the Blueprint website on our blog where we actually talk about like how to create a UWorld journal. And then I kind of emphasize this, but this is one of the big things you just got to keep in mind the entire time is spaced repetition, tools like flashcards, tools like Sketchy, and then retrieval, actually applying that information to new questions in new formats. And then that allows you to start to link together those concepts. So you're going to interleave questions and material review. And then at the end of all of this, you're going to have a really strong foundation to basically crush step one.
This is awesome. I think looking at your list of pre-dedicated stuff, I'm like, man, I wish I'd done all those things.
Yeah, I mean, like it takes a lot of work, but again, what I want to emphasize in that pre-dedicated, like also have some fun. I think this is at the very top of the slide, but I don't want you working 7 days a week. Again, no marathon runner ever has run 7 days a week in preparation for a marathon a couple months away. Take a day off, at least a week, so that you keep yourself fresh.
The other thing that I'll add here, just being from Sketchy, is that I really do think that one of the more powerful aspects of Sketchy is that you can watch it in your first year, in the beginning of your first year, and it will still stick until you take step one, even if it's a year and a half later.
I can vouch for that. So I took step one before completing my PhD. So I took step one in 2017. And I started tutoring a couple of years later. And now when I'm on clerkships, so 5 years down the line, I still can picture the Staph aureus, like it's ingrained in my memory among many of the other Legionella, and some of the mycoses. It's just crazy how well it sticks.
Sorry. The other plug I'll add is that, I think, as I said, we're known for micro and farm, and that's sort of where we started. I think there's some other really great stuff in the preclinical Sketchy that didn't exist when you were studying, or I was studying for this. But in particular, our immuno course is actually, it's our best rated course. And so I think that's another one that can really be helpful. I think people often take that earlier in the preclinical period. And so that's a great one to study along as you're going through that block, and then it'll be there for you when you're ready to prep for step one. Cool. Pooja, tell us about your strategy.
Take it away. Yeah, I'll echo what Ben said about Camden's slide. I wish I did a lot of that pre-dedicated work as well. But yeah, for some context, at Columbia, we actually take step one after our clinical year. So I took it in 2019, which was when it was still scored. But we get an 8-week dedicated period, and we also have a very, at least when I started at Columbia, we had a very hands-on administrative team. So they created, we had a few sessions prior to getting into our dedicated period where they sort of eased us into how to prepare for step one. And then they also created a very regimented 8-week schedule for us that we, for the most part, I think most students pretty strictly followed. I think it might be similar to something, one of the tools at Blueprint to create the sort of schedule based on what resources you're using. But for us, we had a schedule based on UWorld, Sketchy, and Pathoma, and some boards and beyond. But yeah, in general, the goal was to hit 80 UWorld questions a day with, as Camden said, 1 day off a week. And my typical day-to-day looked like 3-hour blocks, would wake up in the morning, sit down from 9 to 12, take an hour or 2 break, sit down for my afternoon block, take another hour or 2 break for dinner, and then return for my evening block. And that in that block, I would typically sort of reserve a lot of my passive learning. So watching videos, watching a lot of Sketchy, watching Pathoma, and then just like annotating like first aid, annotating any like printed out sheets that I would take out. Yeah, in terms of major resources used, again, echoing a lot of what Camden said, don't overuse resources. I know it can be very overwhelming, especially when, you come to sessions like this and we're all talking about different resources that worked for us. But I'd say like figure out especially one big question bank resource that works well for you. UWorld is obviously the big one, but it worked well for me. But I had also explored Amboss briefly. First aid, I had a copy, annotated the heck out of it, still look at it and get triggered. In terms of Sketchy, watched a lot of SketchyMicro and SketchyPharm. Again, would reserve a lot of like Sketchy viewing for my evening blocks during the 6 days a week where I was studying. And then Pathoma I did find really helpful. I actually printed out all of Pathoma and have it in a binder, also annotated that. I wasn't huge on Anki. I did find the interface to be kind of clunky, but that also might be because I didn't really invest the time to learn how to use Anki properly. But I made a lot of UWorld flashcard decks to, I guess, similar to Camden's UWorld journal, would religiously make a lot of decks for each unit. And then I also use like Quizlet decks and very much like a physical resource person. So I would also create like physical flashcards as well. Yeah, I think in the next slide, I'll go into a little bit about things I wish I could have known if I could go back, and sort of words of wisdom I would give to students that are about to take step one.
Before we go there, there's some questions that have piled up, so I thought we could take a second to answer them. Yes. Can you offer any advice on how to effectively review and consolidate information learned from Sketchy for long-term retention? I would say Sketchy, one cool thing about Sketchy is that it's more than just literally the videos. So I think there's 2 features that really help with this, 3 features that really help with this. One is after every video for step one now, we have a short quiz that's basically just to make sure you were paying attention while you were watching the video. It's not meant to be board style. They're not super hard. They're just meant to check that you were awake while you were watching that video. And so I think that starting there is just like that first step in the spaced repetition process that Camden was talking about. There's the review card, which is a way to quickly tap through symbols after you've seen the video. So you don't need to, spend 10, 15 minutes watching the whole video again. You can quickly tap through the review card, kind of focus on the sections that you need to review. That's searchable, filterable. It's pretty easy to use. And then we have a test feature. And look, I'm biased, but even I will say, this is not UWorld. The questions aren't quite as sophisticated, but I think it's another good way to go through the material, review, and sort of save those UWorld questions in some ways for the more test-like sort of prep experience.
Just to build off of that, the other thing that I found very helpful for a lot of these spaced repetition tools, so Anki, Sketchy, anything that you create flashcards of your own, is of course to space them out with repetition. You want to do the videos multiple times over the course of your pre-clerkship years. But then something that actually I use that can be helpful for folks is sometimes you can separate yourself also from the technology by printing out the pictures themselves without any of the answers on them, and like almost like do a little artwork of your own where you start to annotate them without having those answers nearby, because it makes it sort of it forces you to be like, wow, do I really know this, or do I need to be asking a lot of hints as I look at these pictures, as I kind of like tap to reveal. And so that can be a good way of assessing, are you retaining it, or should you revisit that video?
And then to build on this even a little more, someone asked how to use Sketchy to its fullest. So I'd say all of what we just said, plus don't forget that there's more in there than just micro and font. That person also asked how to go through first aid effectively. Curious what y'all think.
I could definitely talk about this. So for first aid, like I said, it takes a little bit to get comfortable for a lot of students, but one of the best ways to use it is in addition to your other resources. So one of my favorite ways to use it is with your test bank. Let's say you complete a question on sarcoidosis. So you read through the question, and you're like, good, I got the answer right, it's sarcoidosis. Then what you can do is, before you even look at like what the test bank gives you about other information, just ask yourself, brainstorm for 15 seconds and be like, what else could they have told me that I need to know about sarcoidosis that would have led me to this same answer? Or what would have made me not think it's sarcoidosis? What are other symptoms of sarcoidosis? Then what you do is you actually pull up first aid and you open it and you flip to the page that has sarcoidosis, and you just take 30 seconds and you skim their paragraph of description of factoids about that disease. And you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to remember 2 of these. It's associated with erythema nodosum, great. And uveitis, great. And then you go back to your question and you continue to your next question and next review. Because probably down the line, you're going to get a question about sarcoidosis that actually asks you about those features. And so it's all about tying the information with your sort of more active learning style. You can do the same thing with Sketchy. You can do the same thing with like the Blueprint test bank. That's one of the strongest ways to use first aid.
Yeah, I really like that approach. I will also say for me, I did sort of annotate in real time as I was going through UWorld blocks. I would just take the educational objective and then take, when I was doing a tutor mode in Sketchy, or if I was going back to review all of the answer choices, I would write down any information that was present in UWorld that I didn't find in first aid that I did feel would be useful to take away. And then also for me, I would advise similar to a lot of what we've been saying in terms of the strategy of learning what works for you and pre-dedicated, also just learning how it works for you in terms of approaching first aid. For example, for me, I'm very much like a mnemonics and, conveniently I'm at Sketchy now, but visual learning person. So I would find myself doodling things and creating mnemonics through first aid for myself as I was going through the tables and trying to get some of the high yield information. So that's like just a dorky way of saying that, that worked really well for me and it might not work for everybody else. But that, and also the last section, I believe in first aid, they have like high yield stuff. So that I would review at least like once every couple weeks as well.
That's an awesome section. The rapid review at the end, it will show up on your exam.
Yeah, I would please look at that.
Yeah, I think you just raised a good point, and someone in the chat also just sort of, I think, is indirectly getting at this point. Pooja, you said that that worked for you, but might not work for everyone. And I think that is a general theme here, and goes to what Camden was saying about getting started early. Part of the goal here is to figure out what does work for you and what resources are good. And is it useful to you to make your own flashcards, or is it easier just to use a pre-built Honky deck? And so again, I think starting early and experimenting with some of those things can be hugely beneficial. All right, cool. I think we got some more questions coming in, but we'll answer them as we go. Let's talk about things you wish you knew before taking step one.
Yes. So in terms of things that I wish I could do differently and stuff I would advise students to do, honestly, what we've been saying so far, figuring out what works for you early. And what I mean by that is I think despite having taken step one after my clinical year, I didn't capitalize on doing UWorld questions regularly enough during my clinical rotations as much as I should have. And not just to get through the 3,300 actual questions, but more so just to learn how to answer UWorld and like really learn the tips and tricks of like getting through 80 questions a day. I and a lot of my classmates can attest to the fact that 80 questions a day at first sounds very doable, but when you're simultaneously trying to review a bunch of different resources and learning or relearning for the first or second time a lot of new information, it can be very overwhelming really quickly. So for me, I think like when I initially started, I was struggling realistically to make 40 to 50 questions a day. And only a couple weeks in did I really sort of, figure out a pace and figure out what worked for me. But yeah, I think getting into a rhythm with UWorld questions beforehand is critical to being successful. There's so many different options when you go through UWorld. There's timed, untimed, tutor mode, understanding those different modes and understanding how to get through, I guess, like really understanding, again, like what kind of a test taker are you? I did find myself leaning really heavily into tutor mode initially, and then I had to catch myself and say like, hey, this is not realistic to an exam setting. Also how to approach a question stem. For me, what worked was read the answer choices first, read the last line of the question to figure out what it is that you're taking away, or what it is that you need to solve for, and then obviously go back into the stem and, find out what you need to know. And then in terms of the massive essay that UWorld hits you with at the end, which, again, 80 questions worth of like essays in a day on top of reviewing boards and beyond, first aid, et cetera, can be very overwhelming. So figuring out like what it is that you want to take away from each question stem is critical. I also found like, this is like a simple studying tactic for me, but using the Pomodoro technique helped. I'm very much like I struggle to do 3-hour blocks, 1-hour blocks, let alone 3-hour blocks. So doing 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off actually helped me break apart those 3-hour chunks during the day and make studying a little bit easier. And then also please take breaks seriously. Like, please, I've been there. I did it multiple times where I was like, well, I didn't get through my 80 questions, so I'm going to do like the 40 questions that are left over on my Sunday off, or, I'll just review a few flashcards, or I'll watch a sketchy video here and there. And you kind of allow yourself to budget and not take it seriously. And then when you hit Monday again, you feel, I don't know, you feel shitty very quickly. So please do take your breaks very seriously and take your days off. Have a community, preferably have some people that are going through this with you that you can talk to as well, because you all can relate. And yeah, just be vocal with your friends and family about your experience as well. So try to have as much of a normal life as you can while you're going through this.
That last point is super important. And kind of to complement that, remember that everything we're talking about today, these are suggestions. If some of these resources don't work perfectly for you or the approaches don't work perfectly for you, that is okay. I think to like really emphasize it again, just try them out early and then narrow it down to your, 3 to 6 resources that you're going to use and go from there. There's no perfect way to study for this exam, but I think the advice that we're giving you now is like a good scaffolding to then adapt to your own needs and personalize. But it should not be a stressful scaffolding. We're not saying like you have to use these. These are just a good scaffolding, a good place to start. That then you figure out what works for you, because we're all a little bit different. So it should not be stressful. It should be less stressful than hopefully it could be.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
I was just going to say, not sure if your world is still doing this, but this meme is a very accurate depiction of what I went through. They added like hundreds of new questions while I was preparing during my dedicated period. So me and a lot of students were rightfully very annoyed, but yeah.
Every single time. I just wanted to add to what you're saying, Camden. There's a question in here about what are the best video courses for step 1, other than Sketchy, and someone else asked about what about anatomy, physiology, and biochem. Look, first of all, there are no other video courses besides Sketchy. Don't be ridiculous. And for anatomy, physio, and biochem, use Sketchy. Look, I want to put food on my family's plates, but more importantly, I want you all to succeed on step 1. And so, like Camden said, try things out. The earlier you start and the earlier you're able to test out some different resources, the better chance you're going to have to find something that just really works for your particular style. Let's do a couple of these other questions here. How should I approach integrating my class lectures with step 1 preparation? Again, I think this gets at what Kim was talking about in the pre-dedicated phase, and I think something again that Sketchy is really great at. Go to class or don't go to class and just watch your lecture from your bed or wherever you prefer to watch it. And then watch the Sketchy video, look at the first aid section, whatever it is, like add some extra resource that helps you contextualize that information in a step 1 sense and put some guardrails on it. I think med school professors are brilliant thought leaders in their fields, or whatever you want to call them. And sometimes they get a little carried away. And so a resource like Sketchy can help you kind of narrow down on what's important. And then you've watched the Sketchy, it's there in your brain lurking. And then when you need to study it, again, during your dedicated period, it'll come right back. There's a herpes joke in here somewhere, but I'm not going to.
There's another good question about like topics that students often neglect. I would say, everyone neglects different topics, but in general, there are some relatively easy topics and kind of give me points that are not tested like with really challenging conceptual approaches that students sometimes gloss over. Some of the basics of bacteriology, actually, like transduction versus transfection and all of the different type of lab tests, Western blot, Southern blot, all of that. Biostatistics is one, just because a lot of folks just don't really like doing biostatistics, but if you can spend a little bit of dedicated time working on that, it's going to go a long way, because that's going to show up a lot on step 1, a lot on step 2, and again on step 3. So it kind of keeps on giving. And then also be prepared to start to answer more like ethical questions and ethical dilemmas. They're starting to increase the percentage of those sort of more social questions on all of the step exams. And so again, this is about like preparing for step 1. A lot of it now is about making your life easier for step 2 and beyond. And so some of those are going to be good topics.
Yeah, sweet. Those ethical questions, they at first they seem like gimmies, but they can get pretty tricky. Cool. We'll save another batch. Let's talk about pass fail. This is an interesting topic because I think none of us took the test when it was pass fail, but we have some stuff to say here. For our part, I'll just say that pass fail doesn't change how hard the test is, but if you look at the numbers, it seems to change how hard people thought it might be. For a long time, the step one score and pass rate have been essentially steadily increasing. And this isn't a curve test, so it's just like people have been learning more and more medicine, essentially. But, you know, sort of the first year after pass fail, the pass rate went down. You know, it's still fairly high, but it dropped for the first time in a while. I think that reflects maybe a bit of overconfidence. You know, this is an 8-hour, nearly 300 question test. It is brutal. So I think taking it seriously and you know, almost treating it like you're still going to get a score is a good way to guarantee that you don't end up in that 9%. Yeah, Camden, Pooja, curious what y'all think about this.
I think the data is pretty telling. A lot of folks, and we've actually noticed it from the tutoring perspective, is you know, maybe folks haven't quite put in the same amount of pre-preparation that traditionally used to happen, and then get to dedicated and suddenly take their first MBME, so their first practice exam, and be like, oh, that is not where I thought I was, because maybe my med school exams were not reflective of how step one is tested. And so it's a very hard exam. And the thing that you can realize is, like, this is across everyone that we see this decrease. Like all the different populations, DO, IMG, MD degree, all of them, there's been this decrease. And I think it just goes to say that, like, still treat it like a real exam. Maybe you can, you know, lay off the gas a little bit once you realize that you're in a comfortable kind of place to do well on the exam. But at the same time, I think all of the same approaches that we've talked about for when it was scored are still just as important to do now.
Yeah, I would agree. I think when it was announced that it became pass fail, a lot of my classmates and I were a little bit disappointed that we were in one of the final years where it was still scored. But I think in hindsight, it was actually a good thing that it was scored for us, because it did push you to reach a certain bar depending on obviously what score you were trying to achieve. It's still a beast nonetheless, so I would advise you to take it very seriously and not even look at it as a pass-fail exam, but rather just as an exam that you want to do well on.
And this is probably the most telling thing out of all of it.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is just taken from a single paper, but there's tons out there. You just Google search step one, step two correlation. Tons of evidence across many, many years has shown that there's a very, very significant and strong correlation between how students do on step one and how they do on step two. And the truth of the matter, as someone who's applying to residency right now, you need to take step two before you apply to residency. The traditional way was like, if you did really well in step one, maybe you could push step two back so the score is not, you know, going to be a big part of your residency application. But now it is. You really have to take step two before you apply to residency. And so it behooves you to prepare as best you can for step one, because that's going to make you shine on clerkships. And then it's going to make you, you know, shine. And even more importantly, it's going to give you the skills to be able to study efficiently for step two, which is notoriously more hard to study for, because often you don't have the same amount of dedicated time, because you're spending a lot of time on clerkships or on wards.
Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting because you can't see the step one score anymore. But I think if you practice like you play, to extend our sort of tortured sports metaphor at this point.
And you can still get a little bit on some of the practice exams. You can still see the distribution and see like about where you're at. Some of them still give a 3-digit score. And so you can at least get an eyeball of how you're doing.
Let's talk about how to make a study schedule and stick with it. You know, I'll drop some of my own pearls of wisdom here. In part because this is something that I was really bad at sort of before med school. I think, Camden, you opened by saying, don't procrastinate. Like, that was my single study strategy in college. It was wait till the day before. And that just doesn't work anymore. So I think a few tricks sort of helped me change that mindset. One is to have a resource that you can follow. And what I mean by that is use something to sort of scaffold your studying. So whether that's using something like the Blueprint Study Planner, or, just going through Sketchy and having that be kind of your structure, or first aid, or whatever you prefer to use. I think that having a resource that you can just like move through and then add other stuff to it, right? So go through SketchyMicro, and while you're doing that, look at first aid. Then move on to Farm and add in some first aid. Do year-old questions while you're doing both of those things. Move on to Path, et cetera, et cetera. I found that to be extremely helpful. Find an easy way in, meaning it can be really hard to wake up every morning and realize that you have a full day of step one studying in front of you. And so finding something that is tolerable to you as a way to start. So whether that's, start with a sketchy video because they make your day a little brighter, or start with year-old questions because you love doing questions, or flashcards, whatever sort of is your happy place. I think that easing into the day really helped me. Consistency is super important. This is, as Camden said, a marathon. You got to be pretty rigorous about your prep, but your sanity is also really important. So you don't need to do the same exact thing every day if that drives you nuts. Treat this like a job or like a day in the hospital. You're going to be there for 8 or 12 hours, but maybe one day is a clinic day and one day is an OR day, right? Maybe one day you sort of double down on questions and one day you go back to Sketchy, go back to first aid, whatever it is. Vary your lunch schedule. Like having lunch at noon every day made me insane. So, whatever works for you. Be kind to both past you and future you. So, Pooja, you said that there were days when you didn't get through the 80 questions that you planned to. That's okay. Like, don't judge your past self too harshly for not getting through everything you intended to, but also like be kind to your future self and make an effort to do what you set out to do. Don't procrastinate like that. And then I like this one. Get some superstitions. I think that for some reason this made me happy. I grew a playoff beard. Like this weird Tom Hanks thing is actually kind of real. I asked my wife to send me the picture that she has of me from the end of my dedicated period, and she said that I wasn't allowed to show it to other people, but this is real. I grew like a huge horrifying beard and showed up to step one. Have a pregame meal, like pick your favorite food that you eat on the morning of the test, whatever it is. I think sometimes those things really help. They say wearing a suit to the test, or like dressing up for the test, gets you in the right frame of mind. I found that to be crazy. Like I'm wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt so I can be comfortable, but whatever works for you. And actually, sort of along those lines, someone asked, any tips for test day, best use of time, how to use scratch paper, exam day schedule, break speed, panic attacks, etc. I'm curious to hear what you guys think, but my one piece of wisdom here is chocolate covered coffee beans. I felt like such a genius. I use these for step 1, step 2, step 3, the MCAT. I took the LSAT. I used it for the LSAT. It's like a great way to get caffeine without drinking a lot of liquid and needing to go to the bathroom. So yeah, I don't know. Curious for what your guys' test day tips are.
The chocolate covered coffee beans is actually, that's a great tip. I did the exact same thing. You have to make sure not eat too many of them at once.
Don't do too many.
You'll be vibrating.
Yeah.
But the test day thing, at risk of sounding a bit like a broken record, one thing that I encourage students to do is to prepare for it by doing practice tests exactly how you're going to do test day. So like I wore the same pajamas, and yes, I wore pajamas to my exam. The same ones for every single one of my NBME. I washed them in between that I did for the actual test day. I wore the same, same type of earplugs, just so you have that sort of comfort. And if possible, try to do a practice test at the actual testing center. That can be easier said than done, but a lot of places will allow you to take like a free 120, which are 120 questions offered by the NBME at the testing center a week or two before your exam. And that can go a long way towards helping you get comfortable with how to check in and out of each block, where the bathrooms are, how, time yourself. Like, how long does it take you to stop a block, get patted down, go out to the restroom, have a sip of water, go to the bathroom, come back, and sit down again, because that will help time how long your blocks are going to be, like how long your breaks are going to be.
Yeah, chocolate covered beans, yes, definitely. Also just for me, same thing to what Camden said. Like I actually went, I believe, a few days prior to the study center, and just like walked to the room because I have lots of like test taking anxiety. So I was like, okay, where's the room at? Where's the bathroom at? Just getting familiar with um where things are. And then I wore very comfortable clothing. I also just, I think the morning of, I had my little cheat sheets of information that I was reviewing in the car right over, but then I immediately like tucked those away and did not look at them for the rest of the day. Um, and I think other than that, you get, I don't remember, is it an hour or so total in break time? You will think that that's not a lot of time, but it is a lot of time. So please do take your breaks. Like I think I was taking a break after every session, like at least 5 minutes. I would leave the room, I'd go to the bathroom, the woman's bathroom, and I just pace around for a little bit. And that just allowed the blood flow back. And also I would like go in and do like a very quick meditation session in the bathroom, and that sort of stuff really helped calm my nerves. Um, but yeah, I think just leaving the room and actually sort of stepping out into the real world helps a little bit. So please do that if you can, because at the end you'll find that you're left over with time that you didn't use. So yeah, use it.
Even more generally, a lot of folks just do a pyramid scheme during the day. And what I mean by that is their first breaks will be relatively short, just enough time to get out to the restroom, have a sip of water, and come back. And then slowly, incrementally increase the duration of the breaks as you get kind of fatigued. And then maybe your final two breaks, when you have that final sprint, you're like, I just want to be done with this exam now. Then those are often a little bit shorter. Not for everyone, but for a lot of folks, that's kind of a helpful scaffolding. Yeah, so this is about how to create a study plan. Um, so what I, there's a lot of different resources you can use to create a study plan. Some people use Google Calendar. That's what I did. Other people use a Word document. Other people use the Blueprint Study Planner. I'll put a link in the chat in just a second. I think in this day and age, I recommend all my students to use the Blueprint Study Planner because it's way faster. One of the most time-consuming things and one of the stressful things is trying to figure out like how many days should I spend on micro? How many days should I spend on, cardio? And oh, what happens? I got sick. I got behind. I, was too aggressive in my schedule. And in a resource, like a Word document or a Google Calendar, you have to kind of be like, you have to manually shift everything around. And I think in the day and age of AI and all these resources that we have, using a tool like the study planner, which is shown here on the right, allows you in one click of a button to rebalance your entire schedule. So if you get behind on some resources, it just says, okay, your test date hasn't changed. We're just going to increase 5 minutes a day that you spend reviewing material, or 10 minutes a day. And it prevents you from having to fine tune every number of pages in first aid you're going to go through. It does all of that for you. So I think it's definitely worth a try to see if it works for you. And the thing is, you can use all of the exact same things for your pre-clerkship exams as well. So again, it's all about trying resources early and then applying them for dedicated.
Early, 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 early. We both talked a lot about the importance of the break, the time off, the recovery period. How do you make that a reality?
By scheduling it directly. But no, like and using the resource again, Blueprint Study Planner. I'm just gonna put another stick in for it. You just say I want Sundays off. I'm gonna take every Sunday off. Or for me, it was Tuesday afternoon because I only wanted to take the days off that I knew other people were working, and so Tuesday afternoon I never worked. And that was kind of I was just as religious about preparing for that time off as I was for preparing for the days that you're studying. And so it just takes a little bit of practice and then being very rigid. It's just as important as you're studying.
Yeah, I'd also say get as far away as you can from your resources as possible. So for me, like, physically leaving my computer and my house and doing things that I would normally probably spend a Sunday doing. Try to do as many things as you can, where you're not sort of actively looking at flashcards or doing something else, where you can sort of catch yourself slipping back into studying during your off days. But yeah, schedule time with friends, schedule time with family, do, pursue your hobbies, do something fun. We're all people. But yeah, and try to be very religious about it.
Cool. And I think we talked a little bit about some of this already, but curious. I guess we talked about sort of exam day stuff and what to do while you're taking your breaks. But we have this slide, and actually, I think a couple people asked about this. Like, this is a big test. You get nervous the day before. How do you calm down and sort of steel yourself for the long day ahead the day before?
It's tricky, but and to give a little context, I remember I did not steel myself for the MCAT, and I took it, and I got one test block in, and I walked straight out of that testing center because I got so nervous that I wasn't going to do well, and so that's what I did. So no, that my saying that is just because it can totally happen, and it's okay if it does. But what you tell yourself is that you prepared well. Don't try to cram at the last minute. Do something that gets your mind off of it. For me, it was getting outside, getting with friends and family, having a good meal, not changing up your habit too much. And the big thing, get a little exercise so that you can actually sleep, but don't try to do anything different that you haven't done before. Don't try to take, sleeping medications that you haven't tried before. If you don't use melatonin usually, don't try it the day before. If you don't have a rock star usually, don't have a rock star the morning of. Those things, it's all about routine. We're creatures of habit, and so that can go a long way towards making you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I would say for me, just being very strict with yourself, honestly, and saying like at a certain point, like I've done what I can, and I'm not gonna, please don't try to cram extensive amounts of information in the last few hours. It's really not worth it, and if anything, it's just going to um, deter you from doing well. But yeah, just like shut off everything at a certain point, and to what Camden said, like don't try anything new. As someone who struggles with insomnia, I don't advise you to try new medications or do something that, you're not your body is not used to the night before the exam. And also just be very forgiving. Like if you're not able to fall asleep, that's okay. Or if you're not able to like calm your nerves, that's okay. Like just be very kind to yourself and be very gentle, as if you're almost like talking to a kid. But yeah.
And as a person who cares about your kidneys, don't drink Rockstar. Come on. I'm going to skip this slide for a second. I want to go to the end.